start like a smaller culture and then kind of build from that culture. So,
and you can honestly take any live culture. I had a wild hair up my ass. That was almost 2 years ago now, and I bought Reef Nutrition's live feed, and I was actually able to successfully culture it, but in 3 generations when I put it under the scope, it was all nanochloropsis. So
yeah,
you know, like you said, when you buy a blend, one of them is going to take over, and for whatever reason, and like I said, neither one of us are scientists here, so it's just been our observations that nanochloropsis tends to win out in the end.
Right. Reef Nerd Aquatics 1, you mentioned sending a link. I think that would be cool if you remember to, Rob said he's going to post this video when it's done, so maybe put the link in the comments for all of us can find. And then you asked about the discs, and I'm guessing you probably heard, yes, I was successful with Tetraselmis and nanochloropsis discs from Florida Aqua Farms.
Yeah.
And they
have a long shelf life. Actually,
yeah, mine sat for a few months in the closet before I even started them, and I was still successful.
I actually have one. I'll never use it because I think it's nano, and we'll get to that. I am never going to grow or use nanochloropsis again in my tanks, and we'll tell you why shortly. I think it's just a miss. But these are what the discs look like. Oh, I do have a Tetraselmis. I'll be dipped. All right. Well, I think it's older than 6 months, but that's what it kind of looks like. And then you reconstitute it, put it in a small vessel, and grow it back up to a larger volume, and just build up to, you know, your normal gallon or whatever size container it is. It works great.
Right.
But it's got like a minimum of 6 months.
Since we're on the topic of started cultures and where to get some things, another thing I think take away from the MACNA, I guess, just over this last year, something I guess to bring up is your fertilizers. I know some people, you know, will use, I hear it, the Miracle Grows and stuff, and so I guess every time I get an opportunity to talk to people where they might hear me, I'm going to tell you stop using Miracle Grow or any other junk like that to culture phytoplankton. It may work, yes, but think of what you're putting in your tank. And so I guess
those are built for plants, not your corals and other organisms that are in there.
I always try to help people understand that culturing phytoplankton, whatever you put in the media, water that the phytoplankton uses to grow, if the phytoplankton doesn't absorb all that, you're going to put it in your tank. And so I don't know about you, but I'm not wanting to put Miracle Grow or any other odds and ends fertilizers that weren't designed to grow phytoplankton into my tank. So
that's right. So
if you want to do that, that's up to you. But hearing it from, you know, Todd Gardner, a guy that's not a reefer, he's not a vendor, he's not like in the hobby, quote unquote. He's just a aquaculture guy that like makes feed and things to grow fish. So if he's telling us that, I just think it's wisdom, you know, despite like what might be cheap or what you think you can do. There's just sometimes wisdom is wisdom, and you should follow it. Right.
Stick to a Gilliard's F/2 type formulation. There are some 1-part formulations out there. I've read more supporting evidence that the 2-part might be a little bit more effective, as some of the trace elements, you know, when they're kept separately, are less likely to precipitate. Although for some reason that seems a lot harder to find. The 1-part seems to be a lot more predominant, at least from the channels that I've looked for. I'm working on some communications with Algagen. I know they offer a 2-part, but I think their website's still getting up on the hobby side, and I'm trying to entertain them to see if I can get some of theirs to try it. But I know Poseidon's Reef offers a 2-part F/2 type, and there's just a ton, you know, from Mercer, Montana, Florida Aqua Farms, Algae Research Supply Company, and just a ton of other places offer the 1-part. You can be just as successful on that. That's just me being particular. But and then to go on to talk about this, we mentioned a little bit in our first video, and this is a CJ stick, and this is used to measure or estimate. We'll just call it estimate because that's really all it is. Phytoplankton densities, right? In the million counts per milliliter. And why do you want to use that? Like Anthony mentioned before, you don't want to dump free-form nitrates and phosphates into your tank, you know, especially if you're trying to keep a target, you know, nutrient level as it is. You'd rather have that fully absorbed into the phytoplankton that grows off of that. And it's not like you need to perpetually measure your phytoplankton density. What you're seeking to do based off of once you establish a recipe, in that, you know, by volume, by species, by salinity, temperature, all that. Once you got a recipe done, you want to find that plateau. And the plateau is where that culture stops expanding and growing. And then you're going to find that the density stops increasing over time. Eventually, if you let it go long enough, it'll crash due to lack of nutrients. But that plateau is your indicator of, hey, it's absorbed all the available nutrients and nitrates and phosphates. So you'd rather dump that in your tank, you know, encapsulated in that phytoplankton than just free-form nutrients, and to get the best bang at your buck, or at least minimize increasing nutrients in your tank. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyways, that's where we're at.
Yes, no, for sure. And that's the thing. I haven't measured my density in quite some time, just because I figured out kind of my quote-unquote recipe. You know, what I do each and every time, I keep it consistent. And so from figuring out my densities and how my phytoplankton was absorbing, you know, the amount of fertilizer, I guess I judged it by density. The denser it was, the less fertilizer. And then if you let it go longer, it gets a little less dense because there's no fertilizer at all for it to absorb. And that's kind of your plateau point where you start to crash off. Yeah. And so then once you find that plateau, then you go, oh, so now if I use this much fertilizer, this much time frame, I can be pretty certain the phytoplankton is absorbing almost all of the fertilizer, nutrients, and things of that nature. So when you go to dose your tank, it's likely you're putting less. I mean, you're still going to put some in there. That's just, you know, how it goes. But you can try to do your best to use less.
Yeah, exactly. And these sticks, I think this cost me all of like $8. So I mean, it was well worth it. And once I found my recipe, then, you know, as long as I don't change anything, you know, I can coast a number of days, keep an eyeball on it, and say, hey, good enough. So right now we got a 3.5 millimeter or centimeter depth. You go to when you can't see the white dot anymore, and then they provide you a cross-reference chart.
Yep. And
it tells you the approximate density based off of the particular species that you're running. And then there's a sweet spot you can go for. It's just choice.
Because it gives you, I guess, a number. It's, you know, it's not completely accurate, but it gives you something to go off.
No, right.
The color isn't always your best indicator. Just because it's a dark green doesn't necessarily mean it's like dense phytoplankton, because your lighting could be, you know, different. I don't know. So, you know, color's a good indicator. Obviously, if it's a light green compared to a dark green, it's like probably going to be a little denser. But in the terms of figuring out, you know, your fertilizer plateau and all of that, it's just a cool
color isn't helpful at all. It's you know, hey, have I gone 2 to 3 days and, you know, my cultures maintain that same level of density? Okay, there's an indicator that maybe you've absorbed all the nutrients that you put in there via the fertilizer or whatnot.
Right. And so, I mean, some of you new here, some of you, I think you've been, you know, watching what Rob and I got going on for a while now. Like, you know, this is something like we've experimented, you know, doing this. I've let cultures crash on purpose, trying to figure out plateaus and things of that nature. So, you know, I guess we're not feeding you a line of BS. We definitely have a little experience. Not that we're experts, but I don't know. I think to me, at least, I guess I speak experience matters. If somebody's been doing something, you know, maybe they can be helpful. And that's what we want to be, is helpful.
Right. And if anybody out there has been doing it, you know, a while, hey, reach out, because we don't know everything. We know we don't know everything. So if there's some things that, you know, hey, engage with us. We're always wanting to figure stuff out better. And maybe we've got some presumptions that are a little bit off and we've drawn some incorrect conclusions, but we've both been making some Phyto for a while, and certainly know what success and failure looks like. Real quick, so talk about this.
What? That's ISO crisis, man.
At one time, right?
Right.
So tell this story. I mean, Isochrysis galbana, for those of you who don't know, is typically a golden brown algae.
Here.
It looks very unlike Tetraselmis or Nanocropsis, which is a typical green.
They can be smart. There you go. See, so you can see here, I have two going. Tetraselmis, that's the nice green, and then Isochrysis, which is kind of golden. But if you, at least I can see it in my camera, you can almost see a tinge of green near the bottom, and it's not necessarily the reflection of the other one. So I am experiencing some, what I believe, I haven't scoped it, some cross-contamination. I believe that a droplet or two at some point, maybe several weeks ago, got into my ISO. And so over the last, I don't know, month or more, it's been slowly going from a nice golden color to getting a darker, like brownish, like green tint. And Rob, that bottle he has was a bottle I gave him because he is having trouble.
It was a nice golden brown the day I got it. Then I just set it in the window for a week and a half, and it's green as shit now.
So he left it in the window in the cool, like, you know, kind of basement-y, not cold, it's finished basement, but window where there's light, and, you know, it's probably like 50, 60, 70, I don't know, something. But anyway, it turned green. So my ISO has Tetraselmis in it, I'm guessing. Like I said, I didn't scope it, so that's a guess. But either way,
But you haven't grown nano for a while either, so it's Tetra or something.
Right. So I'm culturing a mix right now, but thankfully we put in an order for new starter cultures just this last week. So I have brand new starts coming of Tetraselmis and Isochrysis. So the ISO actually, that culture is going on 8 months, I think, from the time I started the first one to now, when I'm seeing some contamination of cross favors.
Yeah, and I've gotten it from you many times, and none of it's done that until most recently, because Anthony's really good at growing Isochrysis galbana. I can't grow it to save my ass. I just have constant crashes. Or recently, if I was able to restart a starter culture from him, it just went green, and that was our indicator that, hey, something shifted over time. But that's right. The same thing literally happened to me when it shifted from nano to Tetra. So that's why we're restarting. And then we just shared the shipping costs and ordered an amount that worked for us, and then we're just splitting the bottles down the middle. So any way to save a buck, that works for us for sure. But yeah, keep in mind, if you're going to do this, you know, if you're doing multiple cultures, you know, we don't know if it was from aerosol transmission or from just whatever. You know, these things happen. So even some of the experts are doing that. Go ahead.
Kilmuski, if I said that right, if you're still here, you asked what's the importance of temperature on growing cultures. So temperature has an importance mainly, I think, for keeping it alive. Obviously, if it's too hot, the culture will die, and if it's too cold, it'll die as well. I will say I have come across some reading, some literature. I can't give you the sources, and so please don't quote me on the preciseness of this, but I have read that some temperatures, like the lower kind of upper 60s, lower 70s, some phytoplanktons will actually not necessarily culture better, but the like the lipid, the DH, the nutrient, like of the phytoplankton, right? How health, I can't even use my words tonight, forgive me. How healthy it is can have an effect on that. The temperature can have an effect on like that of the consistency of the phytoplankton. That's probably not coming out quite right. That's
so cool. I've checked my temperatures in my particular setup that I'm using. I don't keep them externally. I run them in my basement. You know, we're in Wisconsin, and basements run a little cooler here. You know, probably 65 nominally, but with the lights and the cap and everything, most of my cultures bounce between 75 and 80. I think on particularly cold years, you know, I've seen them down to 70, but I've grown anything I wanted to grow successfully between 70 and 80.
And let's see here, I'm gonna I probably won't find it because we're live, so I probably won't take the time, but I'm going to show you all this Kilmuski. This might be something, and anybody else really, this book, Plankton Culture Manual by 6th edition, 5th printing. Let's see, where are you at? Frank H. Hoff and Terry W. Snell. You can buy this at Florida Aqua Farms, and it's like 35 bucks, but it's their culture manual. It's like produced by them. It's full of phytoplankton copepods, and actually found it very, very helpful. There's a lot of good info, and actually there's some info about the temps. That's why I pulled it out, because you asked that question. It made me think about it right away. From reading this, I think I recall seeing something about the temperature differences in there that might help you with that. But when it comes to culturing, yeah, that typical, 70 to 80, even up to 84, I know is fine, but you start getting like, 86, even up to 90, you're going to kill it more than likely.
Yeah. Paul Mueller asked what are the top 3 most important things for basic cultures? Oh,
good question. Top 3 most important things?
Yeah.
Well, I guess for basic like if you're going to culture, I'd say number 1 thing, sanitation. And I know you'll find tons of people that do this everywhere, the forums here, that will say that that's not very important, or you don't have to do as much as maybe I do, and you don't. But just know that a crash is more likely to happen, and cross-contamination. And like I say, I always try to push this, man. Anything that gets in that phytoplankton and you put in your tank, it's going in your tank. I think we often forget about like big picture. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I think big picture sometimes. Say you're culturing phytoplankton, somehow Vibrio, like that's a real thing. You get that in your phytoplankton, and then you start dosing your tank with phytoplankton that's got the Vibrio bacteria in it, and now you're just putting Vibrio bacteria, which we know can kill coral, in our tank. And so I don't mean to scare y'all, because like now we can't use phytoplankton.
Yeah, it's not likely, but just sanitize,
right,
and
just
70% ISO at home, right? Not 90.
It's just things to keep in mind. So I guess for me, it's always sanitation. I just try to keep everything the same. I try to keep things clean, because then I know the time I'm putting in isn't going to be wasted, because I hate starting a culture and only 3-4 days later have it crash on me. It's such a waste of time, salt water, all of that jazz. So I just do the sanitation up front, and then when I culture it, like I'm pretty, certain, I'm not 100%, because, things still happen. I've had plenty of times where it'll crash 2 days later after I've done everything that I think I should have done. So sanitation, I think, is number 1. Oh, you got a number 2 or 3?
Number 2, I like to keep my salinity a little more on the low end, because even though you're typically in a closed container, to maintain positive pressure, you've got an air vent. And believe it or not, over a week, 10 days, you will get evaporation out of your container. That's just going to drive your salinity up. So I typically am running, 1.02 to 1.023 tops, assuming that I'm going to increase some salinity along the ways. I'm not saying that's a make or break, but it's just something to think about.
Right. And I guess number 3, I don't know, like, maybe not right away once you like get into, because you're just kind of beginning, but the whole figuring out your plateau for the fertilizer you're using. I just think it's important if you're going to long-term use phytoplankton and larger amounts of it per se. Like if you're dosing just a little bit here and there, and that's another thing that
you're wasting your time.
But yeah, like if you're going to use a lot of it, it's good to know the fertilizer, the plateau, because that way you're just not dumping extra fertilizer in your tank when you should be dumping more phytoplankton in your tank. So I think that thing's another important, get yourself a SHA stick once you kind of get the workings of phytoplankton, and then figure that out for yourself. I don't know, it's fun. I'm sciencey, I'm kind of nerdy, so I like that stuff, but you might find it annoying.
So that's a great segue, what you're talking about, dosing phyto in your tank and what's worth it. This is completely our opinion. We're not saying this is factual. This is based on our observations, our reading, but I think we're both of the mindset, if you're just tossing in a couple milliliters per every 10 gallons, you're just wasting your money and your time. I'm a firm believer, if you're not dumping in a milliliter at a minimum per gallon of your tank every day, you're not really feeding the things that you're targeting in the first place, you know, which are, you know, the zooplankton and the NPS corals that you may have, or bivalves or clams or anything like that. I could actually see this firsthand from, you know, this water looks green now. You know, I just refilled this with phytoplankton today. This is my copepod culture, by the way. It looks almost like my phytoplankton, but it's not. This will go pretty clear in a day or two, sometimes three, depending. Pods can eat a lot of phytoplankton, and I just watched that just from watching it. Now, some does settle in, so I can see the difference of what's settling into the bottom of the jar and what's not. But if you think about it, I don't want to quote anything, but I read some articles on what the average density of, you know, phytoplankton is in a given volume of salt water in the ocean, and it's pretty high. So I'm dumping right now 2 milliliters per gallon in my tank. So at a 200-gallon system, I'm dumping 400 milliliters of Phyto a day into my tank. And why am I doing that? Well, I'm supporting amphipods and copepods, and I do have some NPS corals in there, and I'm supporting a lot of fish that eat copepods and amphipods. I got a copperband butterfly, I got a blue spotted leopard wrasse. I've got a mandarin that I've never witnessed eating food that I've fed the tank ever, because he's always hiding in the rocks, but yet every time I see him, he's getting fatter and fatter.
Right. So yeah, no, you made a good point. You beat me to it. I was going to say the whole copepods. I showed my little culture there. You can kind of see like yours. It's thick green. Like I feed these guys a couple hundred mils of my phytoplankton daily. If I don't, the water clears out, and the culture, it'll survive, but it just won't do as well. So to the point of feeding our tanks phytoplankton, yeah, I think if you're not going to do I don't know, I call it substantial, because I think we've all been told that, like, you know, like we use 10 mils for 50, 75 gallons, you know, once a day or maybe every other day, like, you know, just things like that. I can't say I know all the dosing instructions, you know, from people, the vendors or whatever. And actually, I'm quite curious, like, where did they even get the numbers for these dosing instructions? Is it arbitrary? They make it up. Let's just take a guess. Like, how did they determine it? Because
think how many ways they can get ripped out of your tank, between skimmers, socks, settling.
Yeah.
I mean, all they're not getting everything you dump in, you know, whatever eats it.
So I guess to those here, you know, if you're going to dose phytoplankton, or, you know, I guess reconsider what you're using and how much you know, maybe you could use. I'm not saying just start dumping a ton in. It's something you really want to monitor and be sure your tank can handle. But I'm just saying, like, if you really want to say you're feeding your copepods and things, like, you got to use it, because 50 mils in a 100-gallon tank, you're really not feeding your copepods. They're eating everything else that's in the tank. You're just dumping green water in because it makes you feel good. And it's just
basically.
So here's an example. I have about 40 gallons, 45-ish, in the clown tank of water volume, and I was dumping 200 mils, a little more than that, daily. So like 3 mils a gallon. And
your nutrients aren't out of control either, are they?
They don't really shift one way or the other. Now, I will admit, because I test weekly, so I pay attention to things. There's times that I probably see a slight increase, you know, depending on maybe my phytoplankton just had a little extra fertilizer or something in it. You know what I mean? It's nothing drastic. And if that's the case, maybe I just dose a little less fertilizer. But once again, you got to test your tanks to know these types of things. I don't know. I'm a tester. I test weekly. Everything once Tuesday, so that's when I do it.
And then I wanted to talk a little bit about species. Oh, I think Chris Clevin had a question on lighting.
Did he?
Yeah, I don't want to quote anything on light intensity. I know that various studies have been done, and they do list out the results based on micromoles per minute, but I don't have anything off the top of my head. I do know that generally speaking, anything between 5K and 6,500K as far as the spectrum goes is ideal for anything that we're going to grow here at home.
Yeah, and I don't have off the top of my head specific numbers either. This book obviously, oops, had something in there. You know, like the 6,500K or up to, I don't know. I'm not a light guy like some people, so I don't know a lot of that. I just know my.
Most of the white papers I've read are in that range, and that's based on our setup. That's pretty much the spectrum that's in there. Not to say that you can't be successful with, you know, something a little left or right. It's fine, you know, but you don't have to run out and grow and get a, you know, a red light. You know,
no, and
or,
that's the thing. I don't
a pink light or anything.
Typically, phytoplankton isn't growing with like a red light or a blue light or your typical Cato, say, light. You know, it is more that whiter kind of that spectrum, a warmer, whiter. So, like, you know, you see a lot of people, they'll use shop lights even, which works.
That's fine.
That type. Yeah, it'll totally work. So. Yeah,
I think there is a couple cases where I've done some independent containers, and this is just a AI Hydra. I didn't buy it for this purpose. I just had it. It was leftovers not being used for an old quarantine tank, right? And I just used the quick set, put it at 65K, and just shied it at it, you know, and that was fine. So, but any old light will do. Right. I just had it laying around.
You can. I've seen people. I think I've said that, but I've seen people use, like, you know, the Cato type lights to grow fire. That'll work as well. So I think it's kind of open in that regard, but I will, in my, I guess, when I think through things, like maybe depending what you're culturing, it could have an impact on the, you know, the lipid, the DEPHs of the, you know, how nutrient rich the phytoplankton is, because light, nutrients, things, I think will have an effect on that.
Yeah, when you start talking to the nutrient specifics, you're sounding way smarter than I can understand.
But, and that's the thing, I'm just sounding smart, because you know, I don't really know, I'm just kind of sounding a little smart, so.
So the types of the species.
Right.
When we first started, we were both growing Nanochloropsis, and we started fooling around with Tetraselmis, and
there's three ones that people do: the Nanochloropsis, Tetraselmis, and then kind of what I call the unicorn, the Isochrysis galbana.
Yeah, the unicorn. So I started finally reading white papers on this stuff, and I kept running across, you know, ideal species, because not all species are the same. Some have harder fists or casings and are more difficult for organisms to eat, and others, and as well as, you know, the inherent nutritional value. And I kept reading that, especially these aquaculture farms that are raising bivalves and other crustaceans and things like that, they're not feeding Nanochloropsis at all. Those places are growing Isochrysis galbana, you know, by the buttload, and that's what they're feeding these things. And the next one in line after that was Tetraselmis, from what I read. And at that talk in MACNA with Todd Gardner, he actually showed a chart where they actually did a scientific study and showed yields based off of what they were feeding. And Isochrysis and Tetraselmis were there. And not to mention that I stopped using Nanochloropsis altogether, tossed it out, never will make it again because it's worthless for what we do in our tanks, in my opinion. And when I started doing Tetraselmis, my pod cultures just went through the roof. I'm not talking about a little bit. I'm talking like tenfold. Like, I just draw it out, and I don't sieve or anything. I just suck it out with this turkey baster. And this culture's been running for a year now. And I just suck them out, you know, two times a week. And then if I don't want to draw, because I just look and see how the population is, I'll just draw at the top if I just want to replenish the phytoplankton. But it's crazy, the density of pods that I'm getting now that I've stopped feeding them Nanochloropsis, because they don't do well on it. They can survive on it, but they're not going to thrive.
Right.
They will thrive on ISO and Tetra, though. And I've seen it firsthand. I mean, I tried and failed many times with copepods, and it wasn't until I started consistently feeding them Tetra and ISO that they've taken off. And I've been
what we think. Nanochloropsis does have a harder shell. That is very true. And it make it difficult for copepods to eat and digest them. And so that also is true. Do I know all the species that works for and how that? No, I can't say I know all of that, but it is true. And so there are reports that using Tetraselmis and isochrysis combined will give you the best yields for culturing copepods because it is suitable and digestible to them. And with that being said, then, Rob mentioned he doesn't culture Nanochloropsis anymore. I don't culture Nanochloropsis anymore either.
Waste of money.
And so here's
cash grab.
Here's
it's a cash grab.
Yeah, and hear what we have to say, and it might be a little controversial because Nanochloropsis is like the cash cow of the reefing community, selling you green water. It's the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, there's nutrition in it, but like I said, I think for what eats it in your tank, there's far better. And this isn't like if you're going to buy it or grow it, why would you want to put the least optimal thing in your tank for what's going to eat it?
Exactly. And so,
obviously, I mean, whether it's money, time, or space, or whatever, why waste your time on it?
Right. Obviously, Nanochloropsis has its place in nature, in the ocean, and all of it. But in our systems, I really don't think it has much of a place when you consider there's better options, such as Tetraselmis.
Right. It's not saying it's worthless, but it's worth less. So, I mean, if you're going to, and the thing that we found is that Tetraselmis isn't harder to grow than Nanochloropsis.
No.
Now, it would be one thing to say, like ISO, that's hard. I mean, I suck at it. Anthony's good at it. But it is undeniably more temperamental and prone to issues with sterilization than the other two.
Yeah.
And some people are really good, have good success with it, and others don't. I'm still trying to figure out what my Achilles heel is on that, and I haven't yet, but I'm not quitting on it, but we're splitting a new culture, and I'm trying different techniques. So sooner or later I'll sort it out.
See what happens. And so yeah, keep that in mind. 12 viewers that we have. Thank you. That's cool that you
standing room only.
Yeah. But no, like if you're gonna dose phytoplankton, like keep in mind, like dose what's gonna be the most beneficial for your system. Like don't waste the dose. And so I would suggest, I think Rob would suggest, Tetraselmis, isochrysis, skip the Nanochloropsis. I mean, if it comes in the blend, so be it, whatever, if you're getting a blend, if you're going to buy your own. But yeah, if you're buying it, don't buy Nano. Just buy Tetra, buy a blend, I guess, buy ISO. If you're going to culture, I think you just...
Start out with Tetra, or if you want to practice and you have access to some Nanochloropsis, I mean, grow that, throw it in your tank, fine. Don't expect miracles from it, but then when you get your comfort level, or you've got your feet wet and you're like, hey, I feel successful with this, then just walk away from it and use the Tetraselmis. And once you have a comfort level with that, then the next step is isochrysis galbana, and that pretty much is the holy grail for anything in our tanks that's gonna eat it. Whether you got clams, bivalves, any of the zooplankton or non-photosynthetic corals that you have.
Right, and yeah, don't hear me say like Rob said, Nanochloropsis is no good. You should throw it out. Like, go.
We're just making a point.
Wait out on it, But really, like, I mean, I just think it's the sneaky, like, nobody really knows because somebody started selling phytoplankton at one time, and they just started selling it, and people thought it was great, and so then it's Nanochloropsis, and then now we find out there's other options. It's so easy to grow, so easy to sell. Like, I think it's just become like the thing that people take for granted, and they don't consider or question that there might be something better. Let's look at that instead of just, blindly buying green water.
Right. And again, make the decision based on your tank and your goals. Sometimes it's smart to just buy it. It's great. We're not saying don't, but, think about why am I dosing it? Not the general purpose, throw this magic elixir in my tank and I think it's all going to be great. Sure, they opened up corals and found phytoplankton cells in there, but there's still, I don't think there's any definitive research that says all corals will, digest phytoplankton. Certainly the non-photosynthetic ones will, but we're dosing it for our biome, and exactly to, you know, and I believe a healthy biome has got copepods and amphipods and anything else that'll take advantage of it, and which feeds your fish. And of course, if you have clams in your tank, that'll take advantage of it as well.
Hey, are there comments still coming up? Because my comments.
Telegram is on here. He asked where we can get a good quality culture. Jim, we talked about that right at the beginning, and you can get good quality cultures everywhere, but there's some institutional places. Those tend to be super expensive. We're talking, you know, $50, $100, $150 for very small quantities, like 30 milliliters or 50 milliliters. But Florida Aqua Farms has very affordable starter cultures, as well as Algae Research Supply. Both, you know, Algae Research Supply is a non-reefing hobby type of institution that just does research for the aquaculture industry in general. Florida Aqua Farms, I think, does both.
Right. Yeah, those are the two I'd recommend if you're like want to start a culture. You know, there's obviously a lot of the, you know, reefing vendors or people out there you can get them from, or maybe you got somebody near you that's already culturing, you know, go ahead and get something from them. Just know unless they scoped it, and you might.
And what they're selling isn't necessarily live. They're growing cultures to sell you the next culture, not for you to walk away.
That too, something to keep in mind also, is when you go to buy a starter culture, like if you're buying from some of these other bigger places, or they're just selling you phytoplankton, that phytoplankton may have been on the shelf for a while, and it's best if you're going to start to try to get something as fresh as possible.
Right. Usually when I harvest a batch, I'll throw 16 ounces into a container, throw it in the fridge for my next one, just in case. You know, I rotate that out through, and I think I've cultured as old as 30 days from my refrigerator with nano and tetra, with no problems at all. And then of course, you can, when you harvest, you can just save a little bit aside and restart your next one. I've been successful starting with 250 milliliters to 500 milliliters for a three liter batch. So I think it's the best ratio I've done consistently is like a 12-to-1 on a restart. You do a little bit higher or a little bit less of a ratio,
I guess. Yeah, I do 500 mils to 2.5 liters. So whatever that works out to be. You're on comments. My comments froze a long time ago, so if there's people with questions or whatever, I ain't seeing nothing. So you're the guy that's got to answer.
We got another question on temps. You know, 70 to 80 is good enough. I think optimal is, you know, typically in that 75 to 77 range, but neither one of us chase that. We don't run heaters in there.
Like, I mean, if you're, as long as you're not doing it in like a hot closet or a freezing cold basement, you're going to be probably just fine with, you know, room temperature, whatever lights you got on them, 16 hours a day is going to add some warmth if it's kind of cool. And if it's hot, dead of summer, night, and like you feel it's getting warm, maybe, you know, blow a fan over during the day. I've done that actually.
Fox is asking, how do you feel about nano from an outcompeting nuisance algae standpoint? I'll let Anthony answer on his own with his thoughts. I don't buy that at all, because phytoplankton isn't self-perpetuating in our closed-loop systems. If that was the case, the last 500 milliliters I dosed or 400 milliliters I dosed every day, my tank could be green.
Very true. Yeah. So
you're skimming it, you're filtering it, things are eating it, it's settling out. Can it technically export? No, I don't believe it is a competition for nutrients to other issues to any degree that we can see measurable, because it's not self-sustaining.
True, and
that's just my opinion. I can't prove that,
right.
But
yeah. So I don't think it's. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious it's not self-sustaining in our closed-loop systems, because, like Rob said, I mean, I'm dosing like 200 some milliliters a day in that, you know, 40-gallon tank over there, and so it would literally be thick green by now if it was still continuing to produce. Now, with that said, this is just my thoughts, I guess. Even experience, I'm not even sure if I can quantify it because I don't have like good data to say I've really tracked it. But I do tend to try to dose my phytoplanktons during the day with higher lights because I do believe that they will utilize space that other things could utilize, say algae, whatever, because they're in the water. Well, they're still in the water living. Lights are on. I think that there's something's gonna, they're helpful. And so do I put it in there thinking, oh, I'm gonna see some nitrate or phosphate reduction? No, not a chance. I never think that using phytoplankton that it's going to reduce those numbers, but I do believe it will be.
Not a strategy. It's not a strategy we rely on anyways.
No, but I believe it's a competing source for some of those things. Like, I won't say that my experience tells me that if I have, early tank cyanobacteria, even dinoflagellates, am I going to start using a lot of phytoplankton? If I'm not, you better believe it, because I believe phytoplankton does take up some of that space that these other unbeneficial things take up that we don't want. Bacteria, those types of things. Now, like Rob said, is it going to be my method? Like, oh yeah, I'm going to use phytoplankton and beat algae? Not necessarily. Is it a tool in your toolbox? Definitely, but it's a tool just like water changes would be, just like manual removal would be, just like feeding less would be if you're struggling with, algae problems or whatever the other issues are. It's just one tool. So I guess don't chase that rabbit trail. I think that's kind of silly.
We got a question, D. Cobbler. Are you guys watching parameters on the culture as you keep it going, or just top off with the appropriate salt-fresh ratio? There's two cases, I guess. So for our pure phytoculture, in between batches, we'll empty out the container altogether, save a little bit for the restart, and then completely sterilize in between. So by the time you culture it and you have some bleed off, and that's why I recommend stay a little lower on the salinity side. So if you do get some evaporation, your salinity won't climb up to a bad level. But on the copepod cultures, no, I do a swap out. So it's essentially the same in my mind as a water change, where I'll take fresh phytoplankton that I've got set aside for that, stored in the refrigerator, and if I draw out 500 milliliters out of my copepod culture, I'll dump it in the tank and replace it with 500 milliliters of fresh phyto. That's the same as a water change. I don't test parameters. If I see a little bit too much of detritus on the bottom because things settle out over time, I'll draw some of that out and throw it off to the side. But it's just a swap. And I've had that culture running for a year straight, no crashes, no problems.
Yeah.
And then lately, because I'm dosing such excessive amount of phyto to my tank, I've taken to where if I'm dumping 400 milliliters of phyto in, at 0.102 to 0.1023, whatever it is, I'll just go into my sump, scoop out, same equivalent, toss it down the drain, and it's a wash.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I don't check, watch parameters for the phytoplankton either. Like Rob said, it's, I mix up a fresh batch of salt water. I start it, culture it 9 days with the fertilizer, that I've used, that I've figured out with my density stick to find my plateaus. And then I harvest and restart. So there's not a whole lot to, I guess, watch there. And yeah, I just monitor the temp. Actually, I just have a heater in there to keep things warmer, because my setup's different than Rob's. I don't have like lights wrapped on it that probably help keep his a little warmer. Mine otherwise will get a little cool, in my opinion. I find that they get better at that, 74 to 78 range. So I try to keep that I monitor, but when it comes to the others, I don't. Like Rob, I just draw out a bunch of water and replace it with fresh phytoplankton. So it's essentially a water change. The only thing for copepods is you're really going to want to watch out is that ammonia. I mean, if your water gets too dirty, gets up to ammonia, you'll kill your cultures. Otherwise, nitrate, phosphate isn't really an issue for copepods. It's more the ammonia. And so, yeah.
Paul Mueller asked, how do you sterilize? We both use 70% isopropyl alcohol and we prefer 70% over 90 because it flashes slower,
Yep.
and the contact time is increased due to the higher water content in there.
Yep.
I'm going to start experimenting a little bit with pasteurizing my saltwater where the isocrisis galbana is concerned, because I suck at life, and and not doing that is not getting me anywhere. But I don't pasteurize or boil, in this case, whatever you want to say. Well, pasteurizing isn't boiling, but it's near. I don't do that for isocrisis or nano. I've not found that to be necessary. Those seem pretty hardy.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a blank. What was the question?
How do you sterilize?
Great. You answered it great. I'm glad. That's why I probably went to left field. You were answering it so great. I just went like over to my tank in my mind for a minute. But yeah, no, sterilization.
So Mousy, he asked about suggestions on copepods. Feed the hell out of them. If you're going to grow copepods, make sure you've got a healthy phyto. You're not going to grow your own copepods by buying phyto. You're going to have to grow it, because believe you, those guys will chew the hell out of some phytoplankton. They will go through it like mad, but you'll see the benefits for it. Because when I pull out 500 milliliters twice a week, it's like 3 to 4 times what you're going to buy in the store as far as density goes, and they're fresh live.
Feed them and live. And that's the thing with, if you're doing phytoplankton, it's easy to do copepods, and that's I guess another thing why I don't monitor my copepods water like parameters, because if I live phytoplankton, it's not going to be too full of ammonia, especially when I'm pulling water out, changing like that. But if you're, because it's live, but if you're, you know, growing copepods and say you're feeding like spironella powder or any of those other like dead type things, yeah, you're probably going to want to watch your parameters, because that's definitely going to stop your ammonia and things like that. So that's why it's typically, you can grow copepods on other, you know, things, reefroids people do, but oh man, that's just, you're looking for dirty water problems real quick. And so that's why live phytoplankton is so easy. You just throw some in there. Like literally I do nothing. I, you know, take water out, put water in, and copepods.
Exactly, and I've had the same culture going again in a 1 gallon jar for a year now, and they just thrive. But I'm following that recipe. And low light. You don't need a high level of light.
No.
In fact, I have a light dimmer on my LEDs, and it's down to minimum. So it's real low light, super slow bubbles.
There.
You know, like
I'm just using LEDs that are super dimmed. You can see like how dark my cultures are. I'd have to even get a flashlight here to see like let me get one more try. So I don't know. You can see some in there, but you can see how dirty it is in there.
Yeah, keep that water green.
It's just full of detritus and crap down there, but it's full of copepods. Yes, super
That's what they like.
Count. You see the bubbles? 1, 2. Low bubble count.
That's all you need.
That's another key thing for real though.
You don't want to stir them up, because you know that disrupts their cycles, their egg laying ability, everything. It just,
that was one thing that I don't know, guy on here, Little Creatures EO. He's like in Australia selling phytoplankton copepods. Some of you might follow him, but anyway, I was struck.
Sean?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and he mentioned lower the air. And I lowered the air, and it was like night and day difference from having too much air to a lot less air. Like it made me so much more successful. So really, like when you think like that thing's hardly bubbling, like that can't be helpful. Actually, less is more when it comes to air for copepods.
Right, and then keep a good slow boil going on your, you know, show your rate on your in comparison to your phyto. Like say you don't want so much where you're turning your air spout into a blowhole, like, you know, like some fucking whale in the ocean or something, because that's just aerosol transmission and a mess everywhere. But you do want a good steady roil like that.
See how that's bubbling real nice, and then in comparison, if I can be good with my camera, bubbles 1, 2, just super slow compared to, so there's your difference in bubble count. And another thing too, and I don't know, this is something that I'm kind of like curious, I guess maybe I'd have to experiment or something, but I also think the more, sometimes I experience what I think is precipitation in my phytoplankton, like on my straw. The
Oh, that's, yes, thank you. Not the reason, yeah, go finish your thoughts because I want to weigh in on it.
Recently, I've been, I've always noticed it, and I kind of just always wrote it off because it never seemed to hurt my cultures. But recently, I'm just like, man, what is this? Like, does this have to do with, because I'm using more air or less air, and has to do with the pH and precipitation getting on the straw, and sometimes on the glass, but it's not every time. And so it makes me wonder, like, what is it that it's doing that? Maybe Rob's got an answer, because I don't.
So it's abiotic precipitation from alkalinity, from carbonates.
Okay.
I had this genius idea. I thought, shit, why am I want to use my expensive tropic marin salt on something so stupid like Phyto? Oh, I got all these buckets of Instant Ocean, right? I'm going to save money. I'm going to use Instant Ocean. That was the worst idea ever.
Really?
I'm not trashing the Instant Ocean, but it mixes up at super high alkalinity. And with the temperatures in there, the light, whatever's going on in there, I had such tremendous carbonate scaling going on in my jars, right? And on all the equipment, it just precipitated out, and it was a pain in the butt to clean. So if I tried scrubbing it off, I'm actually, over time, I ruined one of my jars. It scratched up so bad. And why do I care? Well, because it's hard to sterilize when you've got scratches all over the place in there. That's why I like glass. Plastic works fine, but you got to change it out frequently because, eventually over time you're gonna scratch it, and we all know scratches, harbor things like bacteria and whatever. And so I went away from Instant Ocean, and because I would have to soak the jar in citric acid, and I didn't want to keep one out of service long enough to get it out. If I soak citric acid, it's going to eat away, and I just wipe it off with a soft sponge. That's fine, but I didn't want to take it out of service for a day. I just wanted to use it right away again, and so I stopped using that because of the high alkalinity, and it was just settling out, precipitating on the glass, and like you said, on the air rod or the RO tube and whatnot in there.
See, that's good. That's, I don't know, cool. Anybody watching? That's a good little tidbit to know. If you're gonna culture phytoplankton, you want to use ocean, you might.
It'll grow it.
Yeah,
you just got to deal with that crap.
Doesn't affect the growth, but to clean up later, like, because mine hasn't ever been that thick. I use like a non-scratch scrubby pad that I'm usually able to get it off. But I mean, I've noticed, I'm like, what's up with that? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe consider
something I was struggling with, and I just went back to a lower alkalinity salt, and maybe I'll get a little tarnish on the RO, but then I just chuck it, between, I have extra 2 RO2 because it's so cheap. I just bleach it with my bottles, in between cycles, and just rotate stuff out. It's fine.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned 90% or sorry, 70% alcohol, correct? And I also use bleach on my jugs beforehand, my bottles. I bleach my bottles. I bleach my heater and my temp gauge and my mixing pump and my mixing bucket for Phyto 48 hours before I do Phyto, just because I let it air dry. That way any of the chlorine or bleach,
that'll neutralize, right? Yep.
It will get off of there. So yeah, I bleach my mixing equipment every time. Some of y'all might think that's crazy or over the top, but I'll tell you what, I haven't had a crash in like a year. I mean, yeah, I got cross contamination right now, but I haven't had any cultures crash in like a year. And I caught phytoplankton every 9 days on the clock. So that, I think it was there something else? I don't remember. Any more questions? Else?
Yeah, I think you got it covered. I think we covered it. I covered everything I wanted to talk about. Was there anything that you left on the table?
I don't think so. I think we touched on most of what we wanted to share with anybody that was interested about phytoplankton, some of the stuff over the last year. And once again, I know I'll speak for myself and Rob, because that's just
sure. What the hell?
We're available to you guys. Answer questions. The DMs are open. Like I said, we're not experts, but we have a little experience. We might be able to answer some questions, point you in the right direction, help get you on your feet if this is something you want to do.
Like helping people. Yeah. There's nothing in it for us other than seeing other people having fun at the hobby that we do. So this has been something that we've had we've collaborated on in the last year. Anthony's taught me things. You know, maybe I've. Yeah, it's been a really good cooperative endeavor, and we just want to share this with everybody's out there.
For sure. So yeah, I guess if you don't have anything else, I don't know if I have anything else. I'll give the last word. I mean, any 12 viewers out there, you got any last words, any questions, anything you want to end this night on?
If I'm going to try to download this afterwards, I'll repost it on my YouTube channel. And if anybody's got any questions, certainly reach out to Anthony and I here on Instagram. You're always welcome to slide into our DMs, so to speak, or post questions publicly on YouTube if I can figure out how to download this thing and upload it up. But yeah, appreciate you guys. For those who stuck it out this long, apparently you didn't want all this time of your life back, or send us a bill and we'll work it out.
Well, I won't. I'll send it to Rob. So.
Oh, all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Anthony.
Have a good night.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.